Carl Jung. Why Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," if he is not God. Carl Jung's perspective on Jesus' statement, "I and the Father are one," John 10 verse 30, would likely focus on his psychological understanding of symbolism and the collective unconscious rather than a theological assertion about Jesus' divinity. Jung approached religious texts as expressions of universal psychological truths rather than literal or dogmatic claims. Here's how he might interpret this statement. The symbolic unity of the self in Carl Jung's thought is central to his understanding of psychological and spiritual wholeness. In the context of Jesus' statement, "I and the Father are one," this idea takes on profound psychological and symbolic significance. 1. The self as the totality of the psyche. For Jung, the self represents the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious mind, the ego, and the unconscious, both personal and collective. It is the archetype of wholeness and the center of our psychological being. The self is not synonymous with the ego, our sense of I or individual identity. Rather, it transcends and includes it. When Jesus speaks of being one with the Father, Jung might see this as an archetypal expression of unity between the ego and the self, between the human aspect of Jesus and the transcendent divine archetype. This reflects the ultimate goal of individuation, where the individual ego aligns with and becomes fully integrated into the self. 2. The Father as the archetypal divine. In Jungian terms, the Father can symbolize the divine aspect of the self, an archetype of order, authority, and transcendence within the collective unconscious. In religious contexts, this figure often represents God as the source of life and consciousness. Jesus' declaration of unity with the Father could symbolize the complete integration of his individual consciousness with this transcendent archetype. This symbolic unity might suggest a state where one transcends the conflicts of the ego, pride, fear, fragmentation, and fully embodies the harmony, wisdom, and peace associated with the self. Jesus, as a symbolic figure, represents this perfected state. 3. Psychological wholeness and the individuated state. Jung believed that individuation, the process of integrating the various aspects of the psyche, leads to a sense of oneness or harmony, both internally and with the world. In this sense, Jesus' statement could be interpreted as the expression of a fully individuated being who has achieved psychological wholeness. This state is characterized by a deep sense of unity with the divine, freedom from inner conflict and division, the ability to act in harmony with the greater spiritual order. For Jung, this is not unique to Jesus, but is a potential for all humans. Jesus, in this interpretation, serves as an archetype or model for what this unity looks like. 4. The symbolic nature of the claim. Jung would likely argue that Jesus' claim is not about asserting his exclusive divinity, but about expressing a universal psychological truth. The statement reflects a symbolic experience of the divine archetype manifesting through the human self. This is a state that mystics and spiritual seekers across cultures strive for, a union with the transcendent source of all being. Practical implication. If we understand Jesus' statement as a symbolic declaration of the unity of the self, it invites individuals to embark on their own journey of psychological integration and spiritual growth. The idea suggests that achieving oneness with the Father is a universal goal, not limited to one historical figure, but accessible through inner work and self-realization. Would you like to dive deeper into how this aligns with religious mysticism or other psychological traditions? The archetype of the divine son is a key concept within Carl Jung's framework, particularly when analyzing religious figures like Jesus. In Jungian psychology, this archetype embodies the mediator between humanity and the divine, representing a path of transformation, individuation, and spiritual realization. Jesus' statement, "I and the Father are one," aligns closely with this archetype's role and symbolism. 1. The divine son as a mediator. In many religious and mythological traditions, the figure of the divine son bridges the gap between the human and the transcendent. This archetype often embodies qualities of the hero, courage, self-sacrifice, and transformation, serves as a guide or savior, leading others toward enlightenment or salvation, represents the potential within humanity to transcend limitations and connect with the divine. Jesus, as the divine son, epitomizes this role by symbolically uniting the human ego with the divine self. His declaration of oneness with the Father illustrates this perfect alignment, where the Son, the individuated human, fully embodies the will and nature of the Father, the transcendent divine archetype. 2. Psychological interpretation of the father-son relationship. Jung viewed archetypes as expressions of the collective unconscious, manifesting in myths and religious narratives. The relationship between the father and the son archetypes reflects the ego-self relationship. The son represents the ego or individual consciousness striving toward unity with the self, symbolized by the father. The process of individuation. The son's journey often involves trials, death, and rebirth, symbolic of the psychological challenges we face in integrating the self and achieving wholeness. Union with the transcendent. When Jesus claims, "I and the Father are one," it symbolizes the culmination of this journey, where the ego, the Son, becomes fully aligned with the divine self, the Father. This unity is not an erasure of individuality, but a harmonious integration of the individual into the greater whole. 3. Universal representation. The divine Son archetype is not unique to Christianity. Similar figures appear across cultures and religions. Krishna in Hinduism, who represents divine love and guidance. Horus in Egyptian mythology, symbolizing rebirth and cosmic order. Buddha, who achieves enlightenment and guides others toward liberation. These archetypes express the universal human aspiration to transcend the ego, overcome suffering, and realize oneness with a higher power. Jesus' statement can be seen as a universal truth echoed in different spiritual traditions. 4. The path of the Son. Transformation and sacrifice. The archetype of the divine Son often entails themes of sacrifice, death, and resurrection. In Jungian terms, this process symbolizes the death of the ego, self-centered identity, and its rebirth as an integrated, individuated self. For Jesus, sacrifice. His earthly suffering and crucifixion symbolize the surrender of the ego's attachments. Resurrection. His rising from the dead reflects the renewal and triumph of the individuated self. Through these symbolic actions, the Son archetype achieves unity with the Father and serves as a model for humanity's spiritual journey. 5. Psychological wholeness through the Son. For Jung, the divine Son is a projection of humanity's potential for individuation. Jesus' unity with the Father can be understood as an archetypal ideal. The Son represents the striving of the human soul. The Father represents the transcendent order or divine self. Their oneness symbolizes the realization of psychological and spiritual wholeness. This interpretation suggests that the divine Son archetype is a call for individuals to embark on their own transformative journey toward unity with the divine archetype within. Implications for understanding Jesus' claim. When Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," Jung would interpret this as an archetypal expression of the highest state of individuation and spiritual fulfillment. It is not limited to Jesus alone, but reflects the universal potential within every human being to achieve oneness with the divine. Would you like to explore how this archetype manifests in personal psychological development, or compare it to similar figures in other spiritual traditions? When Carl Jung examined religious or spiritual statements, such as Jesus' declaration, "I and the Father are one," John 10 verse 30, he often treated them as psychological truths rather than metaphysical assertions. From Jung's perspective, this claim reveals profound insights into human consciousness, spirituality, and the archetypal structures of the psyche, rather than being a literal declaration about Jesus' nature as God. 1. Religion as a psychological reality. Jung viewed religion as a symbolic system that expresses the realities of the human psyche. Religious statements are not about external, objective truths, metaphysics, but about the internal, subjective experiences of individuals and communities. Jesus' claim of unity with the Father reflects a state of consciousness where an individual experiences alignment with the divine archetype, the self, within the collective unconscious. This symbolic language transcends historical or theological specifics, pointing instead to a universal psychological experience of wholeness and connection. 2. The Father as the transcendent archetype. In Jungian terms, the Father represents the archetype of transcendence, authority, and the divine source of order and meaning. When Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," it signifies a state where the ego, the individual self, has achieved complete integration with the transcendent archetype. This is not a metaphysical claim about Jesus being identical to God, but a psychological expression of oneness with the divine self, a universal potential for all humans. 3. Individuation and unity with the self. Jung's concept of individuation involves integrating the fragmented aspects of the psyche into a unified self. In this process, the ego must recognize and harmonize with the self, the center of the total psyche that includes both the conscious and unconscious realms. Jesus' statement symbolizes the culmination of this process, where the ego has been transformed and subsumed into a greater, universal wholeness. From a Jungian perspective, Jesus embodies the archetypal ideal of individuation, achieving union with the divine self and transcending the limitations of the ego. 4. Psychological, not exclusively theological. Jung's interpretation avoids asserting Jesus' unique divinity or metaphysical identity with God. Instead, it highlights universal applicability. The experience of oneness with the divine is not limited to Jesus. It is a psychological reality accessible to all who pursue individuation and self-realization. Symbolic meaning. The claim is not a factual statement but a mythopoetic expression, a symbolic articulation of the ultimate spiritual and psychological goal. 5. The role of archetypal language. Religious figures like Jesus often use archetypal language that resonates deeply with the unconscious mind. Statements like "I and the Father are one" awaken archetypal images of unity, wholeness, and transcendence, creating a profound psychological impact on believers. Jung might argue that the power of such statements lies in their ability to connect individuals with universal truths encoded in the collective unconscious, rather than asserting metaphysical doctrines. 6. Mystical experiences as psychological realities. Mystics in various traditions describe experiences of union with the divine that resemble Jesus' claim. Jung would interpret these experiences as psychological phenomena, a loss of ego boundaries, where the individual feels at one with the universe or a higher power. A direct encounter with the self, symbolized as God or the divine source. Such experiences are real and transformative on a psychological level, but do not necessarily imply objective metaphysical truths. Implications of Jung's view. From Jung's standpoint, Jesus' statement invites us to consider our own potential for transformation. Like Jesus, we can seek alignment with the archetypal self and experience a sense of unity with the divine. The universality of religious symbolism. Jesus' words reflect a psychological truth that transcends cultural and religious boundaries, resonating with archetypal patterns found in all human beings. Religion as a tool for individuation. Rather than debating metaphysical claims, we can view religious teachings as guides for achieving psychological wholeness and spiritual growth. In summary, Jung would see Jesus' statement not as a metaphysical claim about his exclusive divinity, but as a psychological insight into the potential for unity with the divine archetype within every human being. This interpretation emphasizes the universality of the spiritual journey and the transformative power of religious symbols. Would you like to explore examples of how this perspective is echoed in other traditions or in modern psychological practices? Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious provides a powerful framework for interpreting religious and spiritual statements, such as Jesus' claim, "I and the Father are one," John 10 verse 30. From this perspective, such declarations are not just historical or cultural artifacts but expressions of universal truths embedded in the collective psyche of humanity. 1. The collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is a repository of shared, universal psychic structures and patterns, called archetypes, that transcend individual experience. These archetypes manifest in myths, symbols, and religious doctrines across cultures. Jesus as an archetype. Jesus represents the archetype of the divine Son, the mediator between humanity and the divine, which is a recurring figure in the collective unconscious. His statement of oneness with the Father reflects a universal archetypal truth about the potential for human beings to transcend ego limitations and unite with the divine source. 2. Archetypes and universal themes. Jung believed that archetypes emerge spontaneously in human cultures because they resonate with deep psychological truths. I and the Father are one taps into several key archetypal themes. Unity with the divine. The yearning for connection with a transcendent power is a universal aspect of human experience, reflected in figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna. Transformation and wholeness. The statement symbolizes the process of individuation, where the individual ego achieves harmony with the greater self, mirroring the union of the human and divine. This universality makes the claim resonate far beyond the specific religious context of Christianity. 3. Religious symbolism as expressions of the unconscious. Jung argued that religious symbols are psychological realities that convey profound truths about the human condition. Jesus' declaration is one such symbol, representing the integration of opposites. Humanity, the Son, and divinity, the Father, are united, symbolizing the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious mind. The ultimate goal of life. The oneness with the Father reflects the deep human longing for completeness and a return to the source of all being, a theme echoed in myths and mysticism worldwide. 4. Cross-cultural parallels. The idea of unity with the divine is not unique to Christianity. Jung would highlight similar expressions across traditions, suggesting they stem from the collective unconscious. Hinduism. The concept of Tattvam Asi, thou art that, expresses the oneness of the individual self, Atman, with the universal self, Brahman. Buddhism. Enlightenment involves realizing the illusory nature of the ego and experiencing unity with the infinite. Mystical Islam, Sufism. The poet Rumi speaks of dissolving the self into the beloved, a metaphor for union with God. Indigenous traditions. Many indigenous myths describe humans as intimately connected with the divine forces of nature. Jesus' words, in Jung's view, are another articulation of this universal truth, the possibility of achieving psychological and spiritual oneness with a transcendent reality. 5. The function of universal truths. Jung believed that universal archetypal truths serve crucial psychological functions, healing and wholeness. By connecting with these truths, individuals can transcend inner conflicts and achieve integration. Guidance. Archetypal images provide a map for navigating the spiritual journey, showing us the way toward individuation. Unity. These truths remind us of our shared humanity and the deep connections between all spiritual traditions. Jesus' statement, in this light, becomes a timeless expression of humanity's collective quest for divine unity and psychological wholeness. 6. Practical implications of Jung's view. From a Jungian perspective, reflecting on Jesus' claim offers personal transformation. It challenges us to seek unity within ourselves, integrating the fragmented parts of our psyche into a harmonious whole. Interfaith understanding. Recognizing the universality of this archetype fosters respect for diverse spiritual paths. Symbolic interpretation of religion. It encourages us to view religious teachings not as rigid doctrines, but as living symbols that point to profound psychological realities. Conclusion. Jung would interpret I and the Father are one as an expression of a universal truth encoded in the collective unconscious. It reflects the deep psychological reality of humanity's potential for transformation, wholeness, and unity with the divine. Far from being a statement confined to a specific time or tradition, it resonates as a timeless archetypal message about the human journey toward ultimate meaning and connection. Would you like to delve deeper into how this universal perspective could influence personal spirituality or the interpretation of other religious figures? Carl Jung's interpretation of Jesus' statement, I and the Father are one, carries profound psychological implications that extend beyond theology to touch on universal human experiences of transformation, self-realization, and connection to the divine. These implications reflect Jung's belief that religious symbols and teachings express deep truths about the psyche and the process of achieving wholeness. 1. Unity with the divine archetype. Jung saw the statement as a symbolic affirmation of the potential for human beings to achieve unity with the divine archetype, which he identified as the self in his psychological framework. This union reflects psychological integration. The ego aligns and harmonizes with the greater self, the totality of the psyche. Transcendence of ego. By surrendering the ego's narrow focus, an individual can connect with the transcendent aspects of existence, symbolized by God or the Father. In this sense, Jesus' declaration models the ideal state of wholeness and spiritual fulfillment, attainable by anyone who undertakes the journey of individuation. 2. Universality of spiritual truths. Jung's interpretation emphasizes that the truth behind Jesus' words is universal, not exclusive to Christianity. Religious symbols like the Father-Son unity express archetypal experiences shared by all humans, regardless of culture or faith. This universal accessibility suggests that Jesus' statement serves as a symbolic guide, pointing to a deeper psychological and spiritual reality that applies to everyone. Jung's implication is that religious figures like Jesus embody archetypal patterns that resonate with the collective unconscious, helping humanity understand its shared potential for transformation and unity with the divine. 3. The path of individuation. Jung understood the process of individuation, the integration of all aspects of the psyche, as the ultimate goal of human development. Jesus' unity with the Father symbolizes the endpoint of this journey. Reconciliation of opposites. Individuation involves uniting the conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, human and divine, mirroring the unity expressed in Jesus' words. Oneness with the whole. The Father represents the divine order of the cosmos, and unity with the Father symbolizes the individual's integration into this greater whole. This perspective reinterprets Jesus' words as a metaphorical map for psychological wholeness rather than a metaphysical claim. 4. Religious teachings as psychological models. Jung implied that statements like, "I and the Father are one," are not dogmatic declarations about Jesus' unique divinity, but psychological truths that invite individuals to undertake their own transformative journey. Jesus as a model. Rather than being a figure to worship exclusively, Jesus serves as a symbolic guide who exemplifies the integration of the ego and the self. Invitation to growth. The statement encourages individuals to reflect on their relationship with the divine archetype and strive for personal individuation. 5. Healing through connection to the archetypal. Jung believed that many psychological struggles stem from disconnection from the archetypal and spiritual dimensions of life. Jesus' words symbolize healing potential. Reconnecting with the archetype of the divine can provide a sense of meaning, purpose, and wholeness. A guide for the modern psyche. In a world where many feel alienated from traditional religious frameworks, Jung's interpretation repositions spiritual teachings as vital psychological tools rather than rigid doctrines. 6. Integration across traditions. Jung's perspective dissolves the boundaries between religious traditions by highlighting their shared archetypal foundations. The oneness Jesus describes is mirrored in Hinduism's concept of Atman-Brahman unity, Buddhism's idea of transcending the ego to achieve enlightenment, Sufism's mystical union with the beloved God. For Jung, the statement points to the shared psychological and spiritual aspirations of humanity, rather than asserting a unique metaphysical truth. 7. Practical implications. Jung's interpretation of Jesus' statement carries actionable insights for individuals seeking growth and meaning. Pursuit of inner wholeness. It challenges individuals to undertake the inner work of individuation, integrating all aspects of themselves into a unified whole. Spiritual exploration. It encourages a symbolic understanding of religious teachings, making them relevant to personal psychological development. Interfaith dialogue. By highlighting the universality of archetypal truths, Jung's perspective fosters mutual respect and understanding across spiritual traditions. Conclusion. Jung's view transforms Jesus' statement, "I and the Father are one," from a narrowly theological claim into a profound psychological insight. It becomes a universal symbol of humanity's potential to transcend ego, achieve wholeness, and reconnect with the divine archetype. This perspective not only deepens our understanding of Jesus' role as a spiritual figure, but also opens the door for all individuals to explore their own paths toward unity with the greater self. Would you like to explore how these ideas could be applied to personal growth or modern spirituality?